Welcome to this brief webinar regarding data analysis teaming in an RtII framework. The purpose of this webinar is for you to become acquainted with 3 types of grade level meetings that you will be conducting throughout the year and look at the purpose for each. We will finish by looking specifically at the IDEEAL plan that supports the grade level team meeting. Just a reminder that as we embark on this process, when teams are getting together, the process, in order for it to be successful, needs to be collaborative with a clearly defined purpose. When we have a clear purpose, we all can remain focused and analytical, avoiding the bird walking or problem admiring that sometimes happens when we look at data. And we can be most successful when there is structure during the teaming process. Everything from where we will meet, how long we will have, to a standard agenda and a clear facilitator who moves the process along. Data teaming is when staff members are able to work together, and in order to do that, they need to be able to access critical data on all students and their performance related to achievement of standards. And while access is still an issue that we all are working on, it is important that the teachers who are devising the plans and implementing them have access to the data. There are 3 levels of data teaming that we're going to take a look at. And the first is grade level, and that is the one you are all getting ready to embark on right now. And the second one, while it says intervention level, it is still a grade level team that is meeting. And then finally, what we were going to refer to as a grade level interim meeting. Let's take each of them one at a time. The first is grade level teaming. You have heard of the IDEEAL plan. The goal of the grade level teaming is to complete the IDEEAL plan. We will have this meeting 3 times a year, and you can look at it as a form of progress monitoring for grade level standards. We measure the progress of our students from the beginning of the year to the end of the year by looking at where we expect them to be on a trajectory, and are they maintaining that altitude. If we have students who are not on the trajectory where they need to be, or they slip, our first question is, what is our core instruction doing, and is it enough? Do we need to adjust our core instruction because students at a grade level are not demonstrating achievement of the skills that they need to be on target for the end of year expectations? When we realize that our grade level as a whole is not where we need them to be, then we need to set measurable goals for student achievement that we can reach partway through the year in hopes of getting students back on the right trajectory. Once we set a goal, we need to plan for the instructional adjustments that we will make, and then implement those instructional adjustments with fidelity in all classes. Those instructional adjustments should be based on what we know research tells us are the best opportunities or the best strategies to increase achievement. And then periodically we need to be reviewing student growth towards whatever that performance target is that we've decided. It is only after all of these steps, which I will walk you through in the IDEEAL plan, are done, that we address the other purpose for a grade level team meeting. And that is, once we've decided what the grade level needs, then we take a look at who are the students who are at risk for failure, who are really discrepant. And in addition to our grade level plan, what else do they need in order to increase achievement? As I mentioned already, grade level data meetings will be at least 3 times a year, beginning, middle, and end of year. And the focus for literacy will be a little different than the focus for math. When looking at literacy grade level data, all educators who share the same group of students will meet to look at the data as a grade level. Literacy in all content areas has a direct correlation to achievement. And it's not that math does not. Math is also very important in terms of integrating across all content areas. But at this time, we've chosen to organize math a little differently. And the principals are going to allow math to organize more along department lines and allow, even though we will still have 4 grade level IDEAL plans, in order to increase the collaborative nature of the meeting, we'll allow 5th and 6th grade to create their IDEAL plans together, and 7th and 8th grade to work on their IDEAL plans. And of course, in addition to the math department members attending this meeting, any resource people who will be helping out with interventions should also be at that meeting. The facilitator for this grade level data meeting should rotate. No one person should take ownership of the meeting, because as we work to grow all of our students, we all have a stake in their success. So we want to share ownership of the students. The type of data we'll be looking at a grade level meeting includes PSSA, PVOS projections, any common assessments among the team, CDT data, the classroom diagnostic tools, perhaps attendance, maybe even failures. We'll go into that in a little more detail when we look at the IDEAL plan. If all the preparation is done ahead of time, then this meeting should take 30 to 45 minutes. Any longer, and we run the risk of getting too entrenched in the problems and not enough in the solutions. So what should we do before the meeting? The principal will designate someone who will populate the IDEAL plan with the data. So as a teacher, you should receive the IDEAL plan with the data already in it. In addition to the data that's in the IDEAL plan, there may be other specific reports that a principal decides or the designee decides would be helpful in digging deeper. For instance, performance level data for PSSAs only gives one 20,000 view of where the students are. But to dig deeper, a report through something like eMetric that would show where students performed against the reporting categories would be more helpful when trying to determine what skills a grade level team is going to focus on for their goal. Those IDEAL plans will be sent to you ahead of time, and you should have received them by the time you watch this webinar, so that as you watch the webinar, you can have your data in front of you and you can be thinking about the steps in the plan. Your job prior to the meeting is to make sure you take a look at all of the data that's been provided, and that includes any reports that may be included as well, and to be thinking not in terms of your class, but in terms of the entire grade level. Where does there seem to be a prioritized need, a gap, if you will, that needs to be filled? We want to think in terms of skills that are on a continuum, and we don't want to set our sights too high if there are prerequisite skills needed for some of those higher level. For instance, comprehension may be flagging, but a look deeper into data may determine that vocabulary is actually a big issue, and students struggle with multiple meaning words or multisyllabic words, in which case just working on comprehension may miss the real problem or the prerequisite skill of developing students' vocabulary. So the focus should probably be on vocabulary prior to working on comprehension. The outcomes of a grade level meeting are first and foremost to identify potential weaknesses in our core instruction and to make the adjustments as necessary. Are there holes in our instruction that show up as skill deficits in the testing data? And are those holes because we haven't even taught them to the students? You are getting these students for the first time. So at this point, this is not a reflection of what you have done with these students, but rather what they have come to you with. So it's a really good time to take as deep a look as you can into what are the things that students are missing. And then determine, is that missing skill pervasive across the entire grade level? In other words, something that many, many kids need. And so therefore, we don't want to intervene with small groups to build that skill, because my goodness, we would have way too many groups and we would overload our system. We're really looking for those skill deficits that seem to go across the entire grade level, and if we could provide instruction in that area, would actually help a lot of students if we strategically place it in the core with good research-based instructional strategies. And it's something that everyone in that grade level is working on. So when you're done with the meeting, everyone should have a clear understanding of what the goal is, what the strategy is that you've picked, and if somebody is going to implement a strategy and is unfamiliar with it, there is a plan for providing training or support to that staff member so they can implement the plan. You also need to know what are the tools that you're going to use to document student response. Because putting a plan in order without thinking about how you're going to measure its effectiveness really sets you up for failure, because at the end of the process you won't know if you've actually achieved your goal. And finally, everyone in that team has a stake, has a responsibility to all of the students to make sure that plan is implemented. Once that's done, then you will look at the students who are really discrepant and who may need, in addition to what you're going to do in the core, focused skill development in other areas. So those students who are falling way below the mark, you want to identify them. Now, you're not ready yet to identify what they need. You just know there's a group of students who are really at a high risk of failure. That group of students that you identify at the end of the grade level process now becomes the focus for your intervention level meeting. And this is the next or second meeting that we're going to talk about. The first time after your first grade level meeting that you meet, initially, you will look at those groups of students and you will start to put them into intervention groups. You may be able to tell, based on the benchmark and the data that you have, what their specific needs are, but you may need to consider other assessments. Because whereas we were talking earlier about comprehension and vocabulary, you may have students who still wouldn't even know how to read some of the vocabulary. In other words, they have decoding issues. And so they need targeted skill instruction in phonics and how to decode words before they can tackle successfully understanding the vocabulary. So this is where you become a detective and you try to drill down to this most at-risk group and figure out exactly what the skill is, the lowest level skill is that they need instruction in. You want to make sure that you've identified the skill at the level the student is at, that you know what program, technique, or strategy you're going to use, and then what tool you're going to use to monitor their improvement. It's really important that as you drill down to these very specific skills, that you match the expertise of the staff to the needs of the student. And by that I mean teachers who have the most deep understanding of good reading instruction should be working with your neediest kids. Now, at the same point, because you have an intervention period in your day, you will also potentially have students who are working at grade level or even above grade level, in which case those students may not need teachers with deep expertise in reading, but they could be given an opportunity to enrich or expand their current reading with some of the other teachers who are available during that intervention period. For instance, this would be a great time to involve an art teacher or a phys ed teacher who could take a group who is either at benchmark or above and do some reading with them that might be related to their content area. Once you decide what these groups and their assignments are, you want to schedule the intervention. Everybody should walk away knowing how frequently they're going to receive instruction, where they're going to receive it, how many students are in there, and then how often they will be progress monitored. In subsequent intervention level meetings then, you've already kind of made those initial decisions, and in between the first intervention level meeting and the second, it's usually about 4 to 6 weeks, you've given the plan an opportunity to kind of work. And so during this time, the intervention groups are meeting, the teachers are providing the targeted instruction, and they're progress monitoring. So that before the next intervention level meeting, you want to look at the data you have and answer the question, is this student responding as expected? Or is the student responding inadequately? If they're responding as expected, then you have to make the decision. Do they just stay in the intervention, or maybe they don't need the intervention anymore and they can actually move out of the intervention into a benchmark group? If they're responding inadequately, they're nowhere near the target you've set them to reach, you either need to adjust the intervention, increase its frequency, make the group smaller, maybe change the instructional strategy, or even consider other assessments because maybe you didn't guess where that student's discrepancy started or where that skill deficit started. So an intervention level meeting is kind of like your check-in. Is the plan we put in place for these intervention groups working? And if it is, do we make any changes? And if it's not, what changes do we make? Before the meeting, all participants should make sure that they are following through with the plan. It may mean conducting additional assessments. Maybe even before that initial intervention meeting, you would be researching what kind of intervention strategies might exist for that particular skill. And consider a goal or a target for the student. Maybe brainstorm questions or concerns you have about that student or about the skill that you're going to be instructing in. And most importantly, once you make those decisions, follow through with it. Collect the data so that you have it ready when you have those interim intervention level meetings, which, as I mentioned, are going to be about every 4 to 6 weeks. Anybody who provides intervention should be meeting regularly, and any others as appropriate. This one doesn't really have a facilitator. The groups are going to kind of take turns showing their data, showing whether or not their students are making progress, and relying on the group to help them make those decisions about, do we move students? The data you're looking at is really the progress monitoring data that you decided at the beginning you were going to collect, and maybe even some benchmark data if you have the luxury of being able to administer any of the any benchmark-like assessments to get a read on the student. Should not take more than 30 to 45 minutes as long as the preparation is done outside. Really, everything's done when you walk in the meeting. You're just at the point where you're looking at the data and saying to the team, okay, here's the decisions I made based on the student's response. You think I'm still on track? Do you think we need to make a change? The outcome of an intervention level meeting is to examine the data regarding the student progress. And if, after examination, something isn't working, or even something is working, we may need to adjust the intervention. We may need to establish or adjust the groups. And there's always further diagnostics on the table that we could consider if we're just not finding the root cause of why a student isn't responding adequately. And eventually, if we have a student who we have walked through and tried to figure out what the root cause is and they're still not responding, we may want to consider a referral for evaluation. The last meeting that we'll talk about is the grade level interim meeting. When we set a grade level goal in September or October, we will recheck that goal in January. But nobody really wants to close their eyes and cross their fingers and hope we get there in January, only to get there in January and find out, wow, our plan really didn't work. So we need to schedule a periodic review. And I would say you need to schedule one, probably late October, early November, where everybody from the grade level gets back and weighs in on, how's this plan working? Does it seem to be meeting the needs of the students? Whatever tool we decided we were going to use to check in on the progress of the students, does it show that they're making progress? Are the instructional adjustments we planned, are they working well? Are we maintaining them? Do we need to adjust their frequency or their intensity based on the data we're getting? Do we need to change our instructional adjustments? Do we need to change our plan? The strategy we decided to use absolutely is not working. Or maybe we need to set new targets. Wouldn't it be awesome if you got to November and realized that everybody that you decided to check in with to see if we were on target had met their target in November and we didn't have to wait for January? Well, then we could set a new goal. So we would schedule these midpoint between benchmarks. And in your system, that would probably be late October, early November. And then again, between January and May would be late February, early March. It would be the same group that got together when we did the original grade level meetings. And the facilitator still rotates. But now, you're not necessarily going to create an ideal plan, although you can absolutely bring the ideal plan and kind of review to make sure that you're working on the plan correctly. You may have whatever that progress monitoring data was, whatever that evidence was that your team decided you would use as kind of an indicator that you were on the right track. That's the data you want to bring to the meeting. This should be a real quick check-in, no more than 30 minutes. Participants should be following through with the ideal plan. And when you know this meeting is scheduled, they need to collect and be prepared to share the data they have so far. At the meeting, you review the personal data, participate in a discussion to determine if the plan's working, and be prepared to share your insights. And when all is said and done, the outcomes are for you to examine your data regarding the impact of your instruction. We know the definition of insanity is to always do the same thing and hope for a different outcome. Well, now you've tried something different. If the outcome isn't what you wanted, now it's time to try something different. If the outcome is something that you are pleased with, we want to remember that instead of waiting next year to input it or put it in place, we would start the school year with that strategy. So always is the opportunity to adjust instructional strategies as needed. And if the target appears unreachable or you've already reached the target, establish a new one. So let's unpack the ideal plan. Let's take a look at its parts. This is the plan that you will use for the grade level meeting, excuse me, and you will refer back to during the interim meeting. The first part is the data. As I mentioned before, the principal will make sure that the data is populated in the plan. You'll see on this ideal plan that you have the assessment listed, and then beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year. Obviously, PSSA is not going to change for middle of year and end of year. So in this particular example, you would just take this data and carry it over to the next column. and actually copy and paste it. You may have new CDT data, or you may have new benchmark data that you would include that would look different than the beginning of the year when you meet again in January. The I in IDEAL stands for identifying the trends in the data. When you look at how the data plays out, you want to try and determine, are there patterns emerging? And are those patterns around specific skills? Remember, we're not looking at the reporting categories because a reporting category incorporates lots of skills. So we want to try and drill down to be more skill specific. If we can do that, then we know the skills that we're targeting for when we start creating the action plan and the goals. Remember, this data is not you, it's what came in the door. So you can be kind of hard on this and be very objective. And if there aren't any strengths, you don't have to put something in that section, but you definitely want to focus on the areas for improvement. D in the IDEAL Plan stands for describing current practices and determining the root cause. You know, the data that is in the IDEAL Plan is very global, and we absolutely want you to look at that without student names because it is a comment on your system. But you may need further details that's in the data, and that may start to come attached to student names. Try to be as objective as possible as you can and not look at the individual student names, because the minute we do that, we start to personalize the data, and at this point we're not ready for that intervention level planning. You might want to open up the data itself, open up a test and look at the error patterns. You know, what is the accuracy of students in this area? Or you might want to disaggregate the data by subgroups or by skill area. The other part of this section in the IDEAL Plan is, what are we currently doing? What are our current instructional practices around the skills that we've identified as areas of need? Because maybe it's not so much that we need to go find a new program or a new resource. We just need to be more consistent in our practices. Next, the first E refers to establish a measurable grade or course level goal for improvement. Remember, we want to know, what do we want to accomplish by January? Or if you're doing this in January, what do we want to accomplish by May? Try to speak as specifically as you can in what skills, because that's going to help you design the instructional piece that goes along with it. When you're writing your goals, most goals are written as percentages. You know, a percentage of students will improve or move from one column to another, etc. But do me a favor and always take that percentage and translate it into the number of students. Because sometimes our percentages look really high and really lofty, when in reality it could represent just a very few students. So always include both pieces. Be specific as possible when you are describing your measurable goal, because that will only help you determine the evidence that you're going to collect in order to show that students have met the level of achievement. You may also, so we're going to move on to the next one. Establish evidence-based instructional strategies or interventions to achieve the goal. So we've looked at what we're already doing. Well, we've identified a skill area, we've looked at what we're already doing, and we've set a goal. Now, how are we going to get there? What's the teaching involved? Well, how are we going to change? Are we actually going to change how we do things, improve how we do things, or are we going to add on to something that we're already doing that we've never done before? And whatever decision we make about this instruction, is it evidence-based? Has it been proven that it's something that is going to increase achievement? There's a great book by John Hattie, Visual Learning, and in the book you can look up almost any strategy and determine if that has an impact on achievement. I believe many of your principals have that book, so perhaps you may even want to consult it when you're trying to think of a strategy to implement with your students. You want to be clear about how often you're going to do it. Is it going to be part of a whole group, small group, or independent instruction? And this grade level strategy, especially in literacy, is something that we all own. So it would be the math teacher, the science teacher, the social studies teacher who is also going to provide whatever this strategy is. They're also going to carry through with it. So you might find that a teacher who is used to teaching social studies has very little understanding of how to teach literacy, but should be pretty well versed in teaching the literacy of their subject. So they may need just a little bit of help. You might need to scaffold for them whatever the strategy is. For instance, let's say you go with the vocabulary idea. What's the standard procedure that you want students to follow when they come to a word they don't know? And make sure that everybody knows what that procedure is, and that everybody understands when a student attempts that procedure and makes a mistake, what are the corrections or the corrective questions we should be asking to guide the student back on track. We can't assume that all the content area teachers have that knowledge. So we need to look at whatever the strategy is we're going to use and make sure everybody is comfortable with it. And if not, provide professional development to make sure they are, perhaps through modeling or even coming in and doing it in another class until that teacher feels they have a handle on it. The A is an opportunity to act on the plan. And this is really the nuts and bolts. Specifically, what are you doing? Who's doing it? What are the deadlines for doing it? Are we going to need to gather materials? Do we need to make copies? Do we have to create assessments? Do we need to train people? If so, all the details of the plan should be in there. Anybody who wasn't sitting at your meeting should be able to pull up that plan and go, oh yeah, I know exactly what they're doing. And don't forget, you need to decide as a team, what is the evidence you're going to collect that tells you students are growing? What's the assessment tool? There might not even be an assessment created for what you're going to measure. So you may have to actually create the tool. How often will you administer that tool? What is your goal? Are you setting accuracy as a target? Percentage of students who maintain that accuracy? What is it you want to see? Be very clear in your plans. The last part of this is to look at the results. Now, obviously, the very first time you create this IDEAL plan, you're not going to look at the results until you have that first interim meeting. But you want to pull out this IDEAL plan before any time you sit down with the grade level for a grade level meeting or a grade level interim meeting and review where is it we thought we would be, and really reflect on, is our plan working? Be ready to share your conclusions. Be ready to give the team your take on, is this a successful plan or not? IDEAL plans are not meant to be written and then filed. They should be a living, breathing document that you have handy and that you go back to periodically just to make sure that you're maintaining fidelity to whatever the group has decided is the plan of attack. So now it's your turn. You're going to take the data that's in your IDEAL plan and you are going to be thinking about what are the strengths that's in the data, what are some areas of need, or what should we be thinking about as we focus in on our goal writing. And then you want to wait for further instructions from your principal as far as the deadline. I'm sure your principals are going to give you plenty of opportunity to ask questions. And then you will be expected in your grade level meeting to complete your IDEAL plan and submit it by a specified deadline. We will be reviewing the IDEAL plans and then giving them back to you with corrective feedback so that you can, especially this first time through, try to create a quality plan. I know it's a lot the first time out, but we're going to try and be as supportive as we can. So please feel free to come back often to this webinar and ask any questions or keep track of the questions you have, and you will have an opportunity to ask them in a larger group setting. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.